Bienvenidos a Lenguas en Contacto, okay? First, before going in any further in this process of explaining things, I would like, as I always do, I would like to review elements from previous sessions so we can follow the ideas. So remember that we started this session 3 explaining some issues related to contact-induced language change. So as you can see here, you have all the material. You have videos explaining why Spanglish is considered a language, or should be considered, or it's being considered a language. Okay. Remember that I gave you this example, or we watched this example of Mexican Americans living in Texas, and not some of them not having a Texas or Texan accent, right? Also, we watched this person that was grew up in New York, but his background is Puerto Rican. So we can also see here a good example of language code switching, or in language borrowing aspects from one language to the other, or as we were defining, borrowing elements from the source language, in this case English, and borrowing them and bringing them all the way to structure of this recipient language structure, which in our case, or Spanglish case, is the recipient language, right? You have also here for you other videos so you can watch carefully and understand, or if you want to go deeper in understanding some aspects, cultural aspects, and also scholar aspects related to Spanglish. So that was session 3, contact-induced language change. Okay. Here we have contact-induced language change part 2, but it refers to mechanisms. Okay, language change mechanisms. Here you have in 4.2 you have the presentation. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the distribution or the organization of concepts, so you can have a clear view of what I want you to go through. Okay, so as you can see here, language change mechanisms, right? So the first one that we addressed last session was code switching, so you already know what code switch is. But something interesting that I want you to highlight when understanding code switching is that since languages in contact is not language structures colliding, but also, as I've been telling you or explaining to you, it's also about ethnic elements or cultural elements that are part of the structure, in this case the language. So code switching also refers to some cultural aspect that we go through when we want to fit in certain class, social class aspect, or if you want to move a step up in this social class pyramid. So we use code switching. So I'm going to give you here in these presentations examples related to code switching. In this one, you will find a linguist from the University of New York explaining that code switching is not only something that it's related to languages, but also related to cultural and social behavior. So we code switch depending on who we are talking to, who are we engaging a conversation or an interaction with. So it depends. If you are having a conversation with close relatives, it's likely that you will have this sort of informal behavior. Whereas if you have an interaction with someone that you consider an authority, maybe your coordinator or the principal of or a principal of a school, maybe you will code switch your behavior, so you will be more like formal when talking to that person. Okay, so here you can have this example. Also, related to this example, there's this interesting concept coined by an author, French author called Elizabeth Kuning. Ella habla de la competencia mestiza. Yo les voy a dejar su libro que se llama Identidades a Flor de Piel. Aquí en Identidades a Flor de Piel, si miramos detenidamente, ella acuña el concepto de competencia mestiza y da una explicación. ¿Sí? According to Goffman. Entonces, por ejemplo, dice, el individuo estigmatizado supone que su calidad de vida es diferente, calidad de diferente es conocida o resulta evidente en el acto, o que por el contrario esta no es conocida por quienes lo rodean ni inmediatamente perceptible por ellos. Entonces, en el primer caso estamos frente a la situación de desacreditado, en el segundo de desacreditable. Entonces, en ambos casos, digamos que esa competencia mestiza te permite a ti, como persona que no hace parte de un grupo social, evitar ser estigmatizado. Recuerden la palabra champetudo, que por algún momento de la historia principalmente significaba como una persona que tenía un arraigo cultural de baja clase y que eso lo convertía a él en un objeto de censura por su comportamiento, por su lenguaje, lo que en otras palabras podría conocerse como un tipo o una persona ordinaria, ¿no? En el lenguaje y en su comportamiento, en sus maneras, ¿cierto? Que creo que todavía quedan sesgos de esa apreciación sobre la palabra champetudo, que se van, por supuesto, moviendo a lo largo de la evolución de las prácticas culturales, o por lo menos del señalamiento de aquellas poblaciones que son estigmatizadas y estigmatizables por sus características sociales, que están por supuesto ligadas también a su capacidad de adquisición o su capacidad económica, y también ligadas a la zona de la ciudad donde viven, si hablamos de Cartagena. Entonces tenemos esas personas, especialmente en el componente afro, o como se le llama también, negro, ¿no? En general es una categoría estigmatizada. El individuo negro se considera tanto en el discurso como en la práctica una víctima potencial. ¿Ok? Entonces en esta parte, en esas páginas, ella desarrolla su concepto. Ustedes pueden ver el recorrido. Pues este libro es como un apoyo teórico para ese concepto de code switching related to ethnic background. But I'm just want you to know that you have this extra something there, that if you want to read and if you want to get involved with the concept, well, it's good for you because you're learning something extra, okay? So it's for you. And this book, it's interesting because it's related to the history of our city, especially this history related to ethnic and race, social issues, not race related issues, social issues, especially when we are talking about Afro-American communities, okay, comunidades negras in this city. So it would be interesting if you have some time to go through this book. and have access to these ideas presented by this author. So let's get back to the presentation as I was discussing here for you. Remember, so code switching related to ethnic background, competencia mestiza, ¿no? Adaptación de códigos, especialmente en lo social cuando somos parte de comunidades estigmatizadas y estigmatizables en potencia, ¿no? Also, there's this video related to code switching for survival. It's another explanation about how Afro-Americans, they have to switch and in order to fit certain steps or areas of social life. Okay, so it's something extra for you. Then you will have this another mechanism that it's known as code alternation. It could be mistaken, or you can like get confused a little bit with the previous one, that it's code switching. They are not the same. They obey, or code alternation obey to certain elements, especially those elements regarding society and our place in society. So code alternation means basically that we as speakers, we are able to change our performance in using language. So for example, you in school, you use really formal structures when you are in the classroom or in the university, because you're relating to teachers, professors, and authorities. Okay, and on the other hand, you alternate your code when you are in your familiar environments. Okay, so maybe you are around friends, close friends, and or around family, and then that's when your code it becomes more informal in that sense, the structures and the behavior in general. Okay, so here you are provided with this example that is talking about how you use language in certain environments, and this code alternation, it's also related to another element that is known as language death. So how languages died and what elements are part of this process of languages dying. So in this video you will find cases, and first like a structure or a typology of language cases, language death cases, and then he analyzes some language death cases, the factors or aspects that drove certain elements, certain languages to death, okay, or to be extinct. So this one is another interesting short lesson that you have here in a video to understand language death. Passive familiarity, it's interesting because it's like two languages relating passively and one of them adopting elements passively from one side to the other. So if we have two languages, let's say Spanish and English, relating passively in one environment, so speakers of one language, let's say speakers from Spanish are taking elements from English, but this interference here, it's like a, how can I put it? It's not a something that happens suddenly. It's something that goes on for a long time, and these structures relate like almost every day, and passively they start affecting one another. Okay, so to understand this, I will leave you here my version of the book, of the Sarah Thomason's book, where you can find this passive familiarity all signal. So as you can see here, let me show you page 140 and 141 here. Here, passive familiarity, page 139. You will see here from here examples. Let's begin with these two anecdotal examples. Example 1 in Danish. You read it, and maybe you won't understand many things here because it's related to some languages that we are not familiar with their structures. Okay, but anyway, read it because you will understand how this language content, this content-induced language change happens in Danish and English. The example 2 is only or restrictive, only related to English. Okay, so it's interesting because it's explaining the usage of whom and who related to social issues. Okay, and it's interesting. This is Sarah Thomason's own example. It's her own life experience using who and whom, and so this is a good example of passive familiarity related to only English, and something that you will understand, and you will see how it works, and you will understand that this passive familiarity also is related to only one language. Okay, and you will think of your own examples in Spanish or in English. So here. And finally, you have this other example of passive familiarity related to this one, African American vernacular English adopted by inmates in prisons, but some expressions were adopted by white inmates inside this prison, and it indicates that the context and the contact between inmates coming from different ethnic backgrounds will end up in this type of language interference, okay, or mechanism. So here you have this signaling of these passages of the reading or the chapters, so you can go straight to them and analyze the cases. So as I said, I'm gonna leave this version of the book that is already signaled, so you can find all the information related to this mechanism known as passive familiarity. Let's get back to the presentation. Here, this is a good example of passive familiarity related to an expression that we used here in this city as part of our growing up in neighborhoods. Okay, I'm gonna give you 1 and 2 examples. The first one is a short article that relates a part of our childhood growing up in neighborhoods, and this one is the explanation that you can find in this link, an explanation in Facebook. So here you can find the article that I was telling you about, por culpa de Electricaribe. Aquí dan una explicación de cómo se utilizaba el time out. Time out as time out, pero era una expresión utilizada para parar el juego, porque alguien se iba a bañar, alguien iba a comer o hacer otra cosa y dejaba el juego en pausa, ¿ya? Y recuerden, esto es el primer enlace que lo llevará por culpa de Electricaribe. Y en este enlace de Facebook van a encontrar una explicación de timeout. Y si uno analiza la lluvia de comentarios, uno puede encontrar, por ejemplo, Andrea Mogollón, time out, tiempo fuera, que espera un momento para tomar aire y seguir corriendo. ¿Sí? Entonces es interesante, al congelado. Comienza gente a explicar qué significaba la expresión. Entonces jugábamos el juego, la lleva y si nos daba la gana de tomar agua decíamos time out, significa esperar un poco, or stop. ¿Ya? Entonces aquí también pueden hacer la seguidilla de comentarios de que en esta página en Cultura Costeña, en palabras, dichos y costumbres, van a encontrar esa explicación. Entonces, listo. Seguimos mirando la presentación. Recuerden que esto es como una guía para que ustedes puedan desenvolverse en el proceso, ¿no? Entonces estamos aquí en timeout. Perdón. So these are the pages that I told you to read in Sarah Thomason's book, page 140 and 141. If you want more details about that, the passive familiarity mechanism. Negotiation mechanism is that we negotiate in order to approach certain code. Okay, so here is an example of language negotiation. It may seem confusing because you're changing from one language to another, but in certain conditions. If you read carefully the statements, you will understand that. But I want you to focus in this explaining. In Pidgins and Creoles, you have this approach to negotiation. Okay, if you carefully watch this video, the origins of Pidgins and what are the social and economic elements behind the origins of Pidgins, and then these Pidgins becoming Creoles, you'll understand this phenomenon known as negotiation. Okay, because if we read it just as it is explained there, we cannot get like much information about that. So in order to expand also our knowledge beside watching the video, we can also go to here, mechanism for negotiation, and you basically will find this example here. Okay, that it's already signaled. To read it carefully, and it basically says that when two communities, speech communities, are engaged in trading or any other social practice, somehow the dominant speech community will tend to create this dominant environment that progressively would lead the smaller speech community to switch or shift to the dominant community language. But in this switching or shifting to the dominant language, the process of, remember this concept that we already explained, known as if imperfect learning or imperfect learning has effects on the switching, or on the other side, if this imperfect learning has no effect at all. Okay, so here you will find that the learners of the target language will take elements from their own native language and will end with their own version of the target language that it's the one that it's supposed to be the dominant. Lo que quiero decir aquí es que esa comunidad dominante tiene su propia lengua. Esa comunidad que ha sido asimilada va a pasar a usar la lengua dominante, pero en ese proceso lo que va a suceder es que aquí el proceso del aprendizaje imperfecto tiene una cuota significante o significativa, porque lo que va a suceder es que entonces esa comunidad subyugada, subalternizada, va a terminar haciendo su propia lengua basada en la lengua dominante, que es precisamente lo que yo quiero que ustedes vean en la presentación. Cuando ustedes ven la presentación del origen del Pidgin en Creole, se van a dar cuenta de que cuando los esclavos fueron traídos acá, ellos no tenían otra opción que pasar a la lengua del slave master. Entonces, ¿qué pasó allí? Como ellos aprendieron mal el español, en el caso de de estos creol basado en español, ellos aprendieron el español a medias o imperfectamente. Lo que pasó fue que armaron como unas lenguas de contacto ahí, pidgins que se conocen, ¿sí? Y con el tiempo fueron evolucionando a creoles como unas lenguas ya completas. Pero en ese pidgin primigenio, esa primera lengua que ellos aprenden rápidamente allí para hacer labores que el maestro o el esclavista requiere, ellos están mezclando ese español, en términos coloquiales, mordisqueado, ahí como emparapetado, con sus propias estructuras de lengua, ¿no? Con la que vienen, de donde vienen, y comienzan a mezclar todo eso. Imagínense esas mezclas, imagínenselas, ¿ya? Y ahí van generando es una versión de su español, del español del esclavista. Un español que ha aprendido imperfectamente con características de las lenguas nativas de esas comunidades africanas, ¿ya? Y que cuando ya están en el proceso de escaparse y que ya viven independientemente, esos creoles van evolucionando, y por eso en palenquero uno suena como español, pero no es español. Es un español que seguramente tiene unas características de español, pero es una lengua nueva, que es una mezcla de español con elementos de otras lenguas africanas. No una sola lengua, sino muchas lenguas. Entonces, como dije, leen bien esto, que es simplemente una descripción. Luego pasan acá a la explicación que entrega ella aquí en la página 143. Solamente estos dos párrafitos corticos, y ahí tienen ya cómo funciona esa interferencia allí de negociación, ¿sí? En donde esta comunidad subordinada adopta la lengua dominante, pero con las características de la lengua nativa. Me refiero a la lengua nativa subordinada, ¿no? Y entonces después ven este video de Pidgins and Creole, que es una explicación muy bonita, bien hechecita, de cómo se dan esas lenguas, ¿ok? Aquí está la referencia, página 143. Aquí está, 143. ¿Ok? Y aquí hay un esquema que yo les dejo. Like, you have this smaller speech community, which is also known as shifting group. We have here the dominant group with the target language. This target language has its own language features, and the shifting group has its own language features. This is the new version, what I told you, that they are shifting to this language, but in this process of shifting to the dominant language, their own features will be part of this target language, which eventually lead to the creation of a new version of the target language. This is the basic explanation that will be provided in the Sarah Thomason's fragment and in the video Creoles and Pidgins. Okay, you have finally the second language acquisition strategies. You will here have a gap filling approach, lexical insertion, also structural features. But if you want to expand your knowledge about this, also in her book, I already signaled or colored the explanations here in page 1. From page 146, you have here mechanisms. You can also see here all my coloring of the areas that I want you to pay close attention to, especially the one related to English, that English speakers, when they are learning French, they tend to pronounce the R sound of English in their performance of French. Basically, they are pronouncing French sometimes with the English sounds. So this one, it's here. This example is an interesting example. Okay. So as you can see here, you can follow my signaling, my coloring of the passages. Okay. You will find a second example of bilingual first language acquisition. They give you here an example in French and in German and Turkish and English. Okay, it's an easy. Both scenarios are easily understandable. Okay, so if you read carefully, you will understand how kids that are born in multilingual or bilingual families, they have the chance to develop both languages, at first not interfering with one another, but as time goes on and they grow up, there will be interference in these languages, whatever those languages are. In this case, French and German, and Turkish and German. Okay, here. Finally, it's deliberate decision, and it's an easy process, which is this one related to these examples here. Kids creating languages, especially when kids or certain people create languages based on one vowel. So for example, they create sentences using just one vowel, A, E, I, O, U, and they conceal the meaning of what they are trying to convey from strangers around their context. Okay? So basically, this is what I want you to go through in this lesson. Okay, this is just my guide of what I want you to do. I created this presentation so you can follow the concepts based on the videos and the parts that I already signal in Sarah Thomason's book. But I don't want you to feel alone in this process. What I want you to do is that follow these steps, and if you have any doubt, please contact me. Send me an email explaining what maybe that you couldn't understand, an issue related there, and I will, of course, will be there for you to explain or to deepen your understanding of any of these issues. Okay?